Hi, Sam here from Roberts Geospatial. Today I'm going to show you how to set up a multispectral scene database. Now, in ProRaster Scientific, if you want to get the best value out of your multispectral satellite scene data, then you need to import the scene into a scene database. Now, that doesn't create a copy of the scene data, it's just a registration process. And all interactions with scene databases are done via the main user interface here with this Browse Scenes menu button. So you can either click this button or drop it down and you'll get a full menu of various things that you can do to manipulate scene databases. Now on the right here I've got the ProRaster user guide, and I'm just going to use that as a reference. So you can add scenes to a scene database automatically or manually depending on whether your scene is compatible. And Landsat and Sentinel2 scenes and tiles are compatible in this first version of ProRaster. Otherwise, you'll have to add them manually. That will be subject of another video. So, when we add scenes automatically, the scene is parsed, the metadata is acquired. ProRaster works out what the scene is, what platform it is, what bird it is, what processing has been used, what the product is. It works out what spectral bands are available, what QA data is supplied, and what ancillary data is available. And if ProRaster recognizes and supports the scene, then it can be added to a scene database. So this will write a small amount of metadata into the database, including a record of the location of all of the raster source files in the scene. So in a manual import, it's your job to supply all of that information. And you need to identify all of the input rasters and link them to supported spectral bands. So manually importing is quite a process. Automatically importing is just click, and that's all you have to do. So you certainly want to automatically import if you can. So when you import a scene, there are three key tasks. First is the import that we just talked about. Second task is that it creates a scene assembly virtual raster. This is prepared for the scene and written into a folder that is subordinate to the database. So we'll look at that in a minute. This virtual raster gathers all of the data associated with the scene and combines it into a single raster source. So it applies the spectral transformations to convert from digital numbers to radiance or reflectance, temperature. It may make top of atmosphere corrections. It will pick out information from the QA data and present that as individual raster bands, and it uses the QA data to prepare a mask field that can be used to identify pixel classifications and pixel quality. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scene in this assembly virtual raster. And the third thing that happens when you import a scene is that the source raster files are finalized. It's a requirement of ProRaster that each source raster has a full overview data pyramid. So if it's not supplied, and for example, the old Landsat pre-collection or collection 1 wasn't supplied, or if it's supplied but it's invalid, and that's a problem with current Sentinel scenes for the QA data, then the overview pyramid will be generated as a part of the import process. And this will produce a .pprc cache file for the raster source file, and it will be stored not in the scene, it will be stored with the original raster source data for your scene. So let's take a look at how you do this. So firstly, on the Browse Scenes button, if you click the button, it will open the scene database. If you have more than one scene database, and you can have as many as you want, then it will come up with a small dialog asking you to choose which scene database you're going to open. So we'll click on it, and I only have one at the present time. It's called SDB_all new, and here's our scene database browser. You can see that there's a spreadsheet, and each scene has one row in this spreadsheet. Also up here there's a map, and each scene is represented with a little red box representing the extent of the scene. And when you hover over these red boxes, it'll tell you the names of the scenes, or the ID of the scene that you're hovering over. And it says here, for example, there are +5 more scenes, so we have a lot of scenes just there. So before we go and create a scene database, I just want to show you where everything goes on your hard disk. So everything will go into C users, and then your username, in this case it's SamSJ, that's my username, then into RGE, which is Roberts Geospatial Engineering, ProRaster Scientific, MSS. So there's MSS folder, and under that you will find all of your scene databases and all of your product databases. So here, for example, is a scene database. It's got an extension of MSS SDB, and it's called SDB underscore all new. I use an SDB underscore naming convention for all of my scene databases, just so that I know exactly what they are. When I look in this folder, I can say, well, that's a scene database because it's SDB. And my product databases, I use a PDB underscore. So when you create a scene database, you'll get this file here, the SDB file, which is the database, but it will also create a folder with exactly the same name as the name of the database, and in that folder you'll find your scene assembly virtual raster for each scene. So there'll be one file in here for each scene that you import into that scene database. So let's take a look at our options on the Browse Scenes drop menu button. So firstly, you see a list of all of the scenes that you've created, all of the databases that you've created, and you can select one of these and it'll open the browser. Secondly, we have two options for adding scenes. So firstly, add scenes to a new database. So this will ask you to name your new database, and then you can it'll add scenes to that database. Now there are 4 ways to add scenes. Firstly, by browsing to the specific metadata file which identifies that scene, and that will add that one scene. So that's a fairly laborious process, and you need to know which file to actually browse to. Secondly, you can add by folder, so you just simply browse to the folder that the scene is in, or subordinate to, and it will find that scene and import the scene. Thirdly, by folder search. So this will import multiple scenes in one hit. So you browse to a folder, and then the system is going to look in that folder and in all the subordinate folders below that folder and find all of the recognizable satellite scenes and import them all. So, with this option, you can import hundreds or thousands of scenes all at once. And then the final option is by manual entry. This will open a manual scene import dialog, and we'll see that in another video. So that will add scenes to a new database. Secondly, you can add scenes to an existing database. So for this option, you'll browse to the database that you want to add scenes to, and then you have the same 4 options. You can add scenes in those 4 ways. Then we have the delete options. So you can delete duplicate scenes. So when you're adding by searching for folders, you might have a folder that's got 100 scenes in it, and then you'll download a few more scenes and add them to that folder. And then you want to just add those scenes into your scene database, and it can be convenient just to browse to the root folder and add them all in again, and that will result in duplicate scenes in your scene database. You can remove those scenes easily just by hitting delete duplicate scenes, and it'll take out those earlier ones and only keep the later replacements. And secondly, you can delete an entire database. So it'll ask you to browse to the database, you select it and delete it, and that will delete the database file, and it will also delete the folder that's associated with that database, which has got all of the scene assembly virtual rasters in it, and all of that will get pushed off to the recycle bin. Then we have this validate menu option, so we can validate scenes. So that will go through the scene database and go through all the scenes, and it will make sure that all of the data files that are associated with that scene are still accessible. And if they're not, it will prepare a report for you and give you that information. And then finally, there's this regenerate option. You probably won't use this option unless I tell you to use it. So what it will do is go through the scene database, and it will, for every scene, regenerate the scene assembly virtual raster. So if I was to make changes in the code that generates those virtual rasters, then I might recommend to users that you need to go through and regenerate your scene databases, and in that case you'd go and use this option. And then finally down here we have the RGB combinations editor. So that opens the editor dialog, which allows you to create new red, green, blue band combinations for visualizing your scenes and to associate data transforms with those visualizations. So let's go ahead now and create a new scene database. And we're going to use these three methods. So firstly, by metadata file. So let's go add scenes to a new database by metadata file. So it comes up with this little dialog, and the first thing is you have to create the database name, and this is important. Now if I type in all new, you'll see that the tick has turned to an exclamation mark. We already have a database called SDB_all_new, so that's not a valid database name. So we need something a bit different, so we'll call it your project here. So you might name it after a project that you're working on. This is my project, which is difficult. Just a description there, doesn't matter, put anything you want. So hit OK. And now we're adding scenes by browsing to the metadata key file. So in a Landsat scene, that metadata file will be the mtl.txt file. So here we're in this scene, it's Landsat 8, level 1 scene. Here's the mtl.txt file. We'll open that. It imported it. It created a new scene database. It created a new scene assembly virtual raster, and it's opened the scene database browser. So if we just bring up a file explorer, you can see that I have a new MSS SDB file called your project here. I have a new your project here folder, and in that folder I've got one virtual raster, which is the scene that I just imported. There it is, and there it is in the world. So you can see that it now knows where that scene is. You can search for it, and it's got all the information about the scene. It knows that it's Landsat, Landsat 8, the instrument, processing, and there are more things that it knows about. So for example, here in the columns we can select all these other things to show us information about what's in that scene. Now let's add scenes to that database by metadata file again, my project there. So let's now find some Sentinel data, level 1 data. Here's a Sentinel scene. In this case we need to browse to this XML file, mtd_something.xml. This will change from depending on what the level is, what the satellite is. So hit OK. Again, import, and we now have a scene added to our database. Here's our Sentinel2 scene, and here it is in the world. And again, you've got all the information about this scene. Firstly, you can see it's top of atmosphere. whereas the Landsat scene was raw data. Mind you, our scene assembly raster will have processed that to top of atmosphere. Let's now add by folder. Select our database. Come back out. We're going to say Mount Bold, Landsat. Oops, no. We don't have any in there. In here. Okay, so here I have some Landsat folders, Landsat scenes. They're all in separate folders. I go into this folder. There's all the Landsat files. So if I just select this folder, hit OK. Alright, now we've imported another Landsat scene. Let's do the same thing with Sentinel. So browse scenes, add scenes to a database by folder. This is the database I want to target. Come back out to say Sentinel 2B, level 2A. This one. Hit select folder. And now I've got a new Sentinel 2 tile imported. Okay. Now let's go add scenes to database by folder search. I'm going to choose this target database. Let's come back out here, Landsat, say Gurabulka. So I've got a whole bunch of folders here. In fact, well, let's do that for starters. Let's go select folder. So what's going to happen is it's going to import all of those folders. There are about 20 odd of them. So you see that dialog chugged away for a while. And now we have all these Landsat tiles added to our scene database. And they're all up here. You see they're all coincident. Okay, so let's do that now with say Sentinel. So we're going to add by folder search, choose our target, come back up to satellite, Sentinel, got 2A, got 2B, I don't know what's in there. Let's just select the folder. It's going to go through and find every scene that it can in those folders. And they all come in, and now we look down here and we've imported a whole stack, 15 or 16 Sentinel 2 tiles through that process. Okay, so did we get any duplicates? Let's take a look. So let's go delete duplicate scenes in my project. There are a total of 3 duplicate scenes. Do you want to remove them? Yes. So we just got rid of the duplicates through that import process. So let me just recap. I'm going to read here from the user guide. So you can create as many scene databases as you want, and how you organize your scenes is up to you. But those scene databases will all be stored in one place on your hard disk. So you might want to add all of your scenes to a single large database, or you may want to create a database for each project that you undertake. That's entirely up to you. So a scene database file has a yourname.mss SDB file name. You must specify the name when you create the database, and you cannot change it thereafter. Every scene database you create will be located in your users folder under your username, under RGE, then ProRaster Scientific, which is the app name, and then MSS. You cannot move these files. When you create a scene database, it creates a new folder in that MSS folder of the same name. For example, if I create a new scene database called SDB underscore Katitanda, then there'll be a new folder created called SDB underscore Katitanda. And the new folder will contain a MVR virtual raster file for every scene in the database. This is your scene assembly virtual raster. And this is the key and only raster resource that you will interact with for the scene. You will never refer to the original raster files distributed with the scene ever again. Now, I think that's key to point out. So let's just go to a database, the one that we created here. Let's just select a scene and we'll render it in ProRaster. Natural color, red, green, blue. Okay. From the time that you create that a scene assembly virtual raster, you will never ever refer to the TIFF files or the JPEG 2000 files or whatever they are, the original source raster files that came with the scene. So you never have to browse to them or anything else. The only file you'll ever browse to is that scene assembly raster. And in fact, you don't browse to that. You do it via the scene database. But those original TIFF files or whatever they are still being used. So if we put on our tooltip cursor here and use the option for displaying everything, now it's going to drill down through the virtual rasters and right down to the original data that it's drawing from, which will be, in the case of this Landsat scene, the original TIFF files. And you can see it all reported here on the screen. So it's coming from the scene assembly virtual raster, band 4 red, but that's then going into this TIFF file, which is band 0, but you can see the naming indicates that it's band 4, that's red. It's also reporting that it's using the SZA TIFF file. That's the scene sun azimuth file. That's what it's using to do the corrections from digital numbers to top of atmosphere in real time. And you can see in that report it's also accessing the green and the blue bands. So in this display, or if you were to do a report and see the report here in the main dialog, these are the only places now that you'll see the actual TIFF files being referred to. Other than that, you have no interaction with them. So just going on with this detail, so no raster data from the scene is ever written or copied into the scene database. Consequently, the scene database is only a small file, even if it contains thousands of scenes. I'd also make the point that the scene database is not a particularly valuable file. It is very easy to recreate them. So if you bugger one up somehow, you can delete it and really easily just recreate it from, assuming that you've got your original scene data still on disk. When you add a scene, the overview pyramid data caches will be prepared if they are required, and this can take a few moments per scene. The cache files are written into the same directory as the original scene raster files. This is the only modification to the original scene folders that is made. Once those rasters have been generated, they won't ever need to be regenerated. So the first time you import a scene, if it has to generate some of those overview cache files, then it'll take a little bit longer to import the scene. If you then import that scene to another database, it'll come in instantly straight away. So you can add a scene to 2 or more scene databases without penalty. That's no issue. There's no problem with that. You can put a scene into as many different databases as you want. You can delete a database. When you delete a database, both the MSS SDB file and the folder that with all its contents will be deleted. When you delete a scene database, the original scene folders, which contain all of your original scene data, they remain untouched. So they're never going to be touched or deleted. So don't worry about that. So from these points, you can conclude that the scene database is a relatively low-value resource. Databases can be created and recreated easily. However, once you consume a scene in a multispectral product, that product will refer to the scene database by name. And if the database is deleted, then the product will become orphaned. So just to reiterate that point, you create your scene database, your scene virtual raster assembly will then almost certainly be used in a product, and the product will refer to that file by name. If that was to ever change, then your product will break. So you just have to be careful about that. So that's a roundup of how to create and manipulate scene databases in ProRaster Scientific. Thanks for watching.